Hello everyone, welcome to Cloud World. My name is Santiago. So in today's video we are going to be talking about the Azure Container Apps, and I'm pretty happy to say that we are going to start in a new series today that is going to be completely focused on this technology. Of course, as always and as we did in the past in the Kubernetes series, we are going to be exploring other Azure services as well that are going to be working together with the Azure Container Apps. So let's take a look. So what are the Azure Container Apps, and what are some of these examples of where we can use this Azure technology? So as the name suggests, this is everything related to the containerization of application, and that means you can deploy any application that you can send throughout a container into the Azure portal. So the Container Apps is a serverless platform that allows you to maintain less infrastructure and saves costs while running containerized application. Instead of worrying about the server configuration, container orchestration, and deployment details, Container Apps provides all the up-to-date server resources required to keep your application stable and secure. So, Container Apps is another Azure technology that actually in the background is using Kubernetes, but instead in this case of you creating the cluster and managing the resources and writing YAML files and everything that you usually have to do with a Kubernetes cluster, you only need to concentrate on creating your container file, send that container file to the Azure registry, for example, or any other open container registry like Docker, where you can also provide your credentials, anything like that. Like that should work, or even use an open image if that is the case for your use case. In any case, all that you need to provide is a valid Docker image, in a container image in this case, and with that image you will be able to deploy an application into the Azure portal using Container Apps. So one of the greatest things is that with the Container App you can deploy mostly anything that can be containerized. So for example, you can deploy APIs that expose a public endpoint. So this means anything that can go through the web and the internet. You can expose traffic via those APIs and allow any other services to consume those. But you also could have something like a background processing where you create applications that consume, let's say, messages from another system, or are doing a scheduled task or anything like that, and they do not expose anything related to the HTTP protocol. So you can also deploy that. Another great use case is when you want to process event-driven applications. You can deploy those as part of the Azure portal, and you can deploy them as background services and even Azure Function as well. And you will be able to react to messages from a service queue, service bus, also from the Event Hubs, Kafka, Event Grid, and mostly anything. And of course, it's pretty well done to deploy microservices infrastructure, so that makes things pretty simple. So let's take a look. When we have an Azure Container Apps, the first thing that we need to provide is an environment. So Azure Container Apps is fully serverless, so that means you don't have to manage any infrastructure or handle anything related to the resources. All the scalability is done by the Azure Container itself, so as the demand grows to your application, the cluster can adapt to those requests. Of course, as a developer or a manager, you can choose how many replicas for your container you would like to have, having a minimum or a maximum, that's up to you. But the flexibility will allow you to increase the amount of replicas that your services have in order to meet the quota based on the demand your application is taking. So for that, we have in the middle the Azure environments, and the Azure environment is just going to be a container box where all the containers that you deploy in the Container Apps are going to be deployed. So take this example. Let's suppose that you have a web application and you have 5 microservices. You can deploy all of those into a single container app, and each one of those services is going to be a representation of a container. So the web application will be a container, and the other microservices will be a unique each container, each one of those. So the container environment is going to allow you to make flawless communication between those components, allowing to give you a configuration for networking, open communication, building event-driven applications more easily. And it removes the requirements to manually manage a lot of the networking thing, because everything is safe and bounded into the environment. In case you want to deploy multiple applications that serve a different purpose, you should have, or it's a recommendation to have an environment per application. So that way you keep everything isolated as it is. So when working with Azure Container Apps, we can deploy things like jobs. Pretty simple. We can have multiple replicas of these jobs. These jobs can easily be triggers and can be executed throughout containers. And also it gives you the capability to build like HTTP servers that are scale based on a rule. You could have also an Azure function deployed into the Azure Container App. This is actually pretty nice that we have got recently. And well, you can have jobs that you can initiate manually or via a trigger or maybe by a basic schedule. So for the trigger types that we have into the Azure Container App, it could be manual, you could schedule those, or could be driven by an event. That depends on the requirements that you have. Of course, the Azure Container App is actually pretty flexible to build microservices oriented applications, because you will be able to build an individual microservice and you will be able to choose how many containers or replicas each service is going to have. So for each one of those microservices that take a heavy load, you will be able to have more replicas, and for those that are more lightweight, you could have less. So that way you will be saving money, and you only will be using the infrastructure that you need to. As I said, since everything is contained into an environment, the communication between containers is pretty flawlessly and pretty quick, since everything happens throughout the boundary of the environment. So this is a great example of deploying microservices into the Azure portal using Container Apps. When we speak about microservices for the Azure Container App, the Azure Container App has a native support for something that is named Dapper. Dapper is a framework that is going to offer you a lot of things throughout the exposition of different APIs and configurations. So let's take a look. For example, you will be able to usually build container apps that are oriented to service invocation. So that means you will be able to communicate between services pretty flawlessly. You will be able to build pub and subscribe applications. You could write workflows within containers, so that means you can orchestrate containers communication pretty easily without like expensive or actually pretty complicated tasks. Also, you will be able to control the state management throughout the containers, sharing a single source of truth. And also, you will be able to do something pretty similar as the Azure function, where you could have inputs and outputs. So you can react to inputs and bind some information, and you can provide outputs as part of the request that you make too. You can choose who interact with your code and each one of those actors that are throughout the microservices patterns. You can configure secrets, make a basic configuration of the environment as well. You can add mutual exclusive access to shared resources to protect your infrastructure. It will give you security configuration and also the configurations to easily build jobs. This might sound a little bit overcomplicated at the beginning, but using the Azure Container Apps and the Dapper framework makes your application pretty flawlessly, and it gives you a lot of options that you can exploit in order to build event-driven applications. So Dapper is not like for every application, it's for use cases where you truly have an event-driven application and you are actually thinking of developing an application that is built on microservices. We will explore Dapper later, which is one of the coolest things that you can do in Container Apps, mostly flawlessly. When you work in the Azure Container Apps, they, of course, as many Azure resources, they have a life cycle. So the first time or at some particular moment in time, when you deploy an application, you create a first revision. So that revision is going to contain as many containers you do in the setup. But eventually, when your application progresses and you want to deploy a new version because the developers created new code or there are changes to the configuration of the service or anything like that, you will be deploying a new version. So those versions are named as revisions. So as you can see, you create a revision number 1, which is actually active, and we have revision number 2. This actually gives a great opportunity because we can use green deployment into the Azure Container Apps, because we will be able to have 2 replicas of 2 different versions at the same time available, and you will be able to fine-tune the traffic between those 2. So for example, initially maybe you want to have 80% of your HTTP traffic coming to the replica number 1 and 20% to the second one. As you progress and you see everything is stable, you can increase the quota on number 2. So instead of being 80-20, you can have a 50-50, and after that could be 30-17 until you have everything into the revision number 2. So at the end, the active revision, it will be the next one after you set up all the traffic into the one, and the previous revision or any previous revision go as an inactive revisions. One of the greatest things that Azure Container Apps is that you can easily roll back between versions, because you can go from one container app into a revision and into another mostly flawlessly. So in case something goes out in revision number 2, you can easily go back to number 1 and so on. So this is one of the greatest things that we have. Okay, now this is like a very quick introduction to Azure Container App. So join me in the next video when, as always, we will be using the Azure CLI in order to create an environment and also a container app. And we are also going to give a quick refresher on the Azure Container Registry. We will be building an image, pushing that image into the ACR and deploying our first application. So this will be the beginning of a great journey. So see you in the next video.